Hello and welcome to another edition of Prevention Works, sponsored by the Collaborative, an organization based here in the North Shire aimed at promoting healthy communities. My name is Andrew McKeever. I'm sitting in today for Marianne Morris, the Executive Director of the Collaborative. Pleasure to be with you today. We have an interesting conversation ahead about content-neutral advertising. What is that, you may ask? For that, we have Victoria Silsby, who is the Tobacco Prevention Coordinator of the Collaborative, here to explain a bit about that. And we also have with us two special guests who are going to amplify the discussion as well. Jim Sullivan is the Executive Director of the Bennington County Regional Commission and frequent guest here at GNET TV. Great to have you back again, Jim. And also Travis Wood, who is the store manager of the Manchester Maplefield store. Good to have you with us as well, Travis, to give us kind of all sides of this question. So, Victoria, again, content-neutral advertising sounds like almost an oxymoron. How does one advertise without content?
Exactly. So, thank you, Andrew, for the introduction. So, let me backtrack just a little bit and explain about prevention and how there are multiple prongs for prevention or substance use prevention efforts, and how that relates to and why we're talking about content neutral advertising, because I think people are going to go, what does advertising have to do with substance use? So prevention has a multi-pronged approach. The obvious is working with families, parents, kids, on educational and programmatic efforts. But then there's this other component of substance use prevention when it comes to youth use, and that's policy work. And that's why we're here today to talk about the role of advertising and how it can relate to increase substance use rates or decrease substance use rates. So content neutral advertising is, in its shortened, most concise definition, restricting all advertising based on the size, location, type, and number of signs that a retailer may have at its storefront. It is not restricting the content within the ad.
Okay.
And that's where if language, ordinance language or sign regulations start restricting the type of content within an ad, that's where you might go down a slippery slope and say that that's a violation of free speech, First Amendment, and things like that. So as long as the language is all about restricting all advertising based on those 4 points, size, location, type, and number, then towns and municipalities are usually within their, realm to adopt some kind of sign ordinance.
Well, that on its face, without knowing a whole lot about where we might go with this, sounds pretty restrictive. I mean, if you're going to limit size, location, and number of ads, what else is there to play with here?
So usually regulations, and I'm going to look at Jim for this, maybe a little bit to start into the conversation, but if you look at the size or the location, so that's saying that a sign couldn't be, more than X number of square feet, and it has to be a certain distance maybe from the road or the sidewalk, so that it's not impeding the flow of traffic or visually blocking maybe the retailer. So think about the safety or access when it comes to a bank or pharmacy or even a convenience store that Travis represents, because maybe banks can be susceptible to break-ins, as can other retailers. And when you start having huge signs impeding the windows or the road, which might distract the drivers, then you're creating a safety hazard to the community.
So it sounds like an early example of that might have been the billboard law that Vermont passed in the early 1970s, which eliminated billboards.
Right. The billboard is a great example because that was really adopted, from what I remember as a young child in Vermont, to increase Vermont's aesthetics, but also to decrease any hazards.
Okay. Well, Jim, flesh this out a little bit for us. What are some of the elements in play here?
Sure. Well, municipalities have a lot of legitimate reasons to regulate signs. I think it usually starts with, and most of the towns and villages in our region have some type of sign ordinance. Some with larger commercial areas are a lot more complex than some of the rural towns, but most of them have it. Many of them built into their zoning or their land use regulations. Some as standalone ordinances, but very often it really starts with a concern over the proliferation of signs. I mean, signs are absolutely essential to businesses. Obviously, you need to tell people who you are and get an idea of what one can do at that business. But at the same time, there's a natural tendency to try to get more attention, and so it's kind of a leapfrogging effect, and eventually you get so many signs that are bigger and brighter and cluttered that there's information overload, and it's not good for the businesses and it's not good for the traveling public, and it detracts from the quality of the streetscape and the landscape. So towns have had a couple different ways to develop ordinances to regulate these signs. And as was mentioned, a really critical thing is to lay the groundwork and the basis for why they're doing that with clear language in their municipal plan. So the town plan can talk about proliferation of signs and trying to improve the streetscape and trying to make it fair and reasonable for all the businesses to have an appropriate way to advertise their wares without detracting from other businesses. So once that language is in the municipal plan, then they have the authority to go ahead and adopt implementing regulations. And as Victoria mentioned, there's a lot of different components that can go into sign regulations. Some of the most common, obviously, are the size of the sign, the number of signs, whether you can have one freestanding sign and one sign mounted flush on the building, how much window space can be covered with signs, the illumination of signs, and things like blocking sight distances and things like that for traffic safety. All those types of things can be rolled in the signs, and they differ in different parts of a town, because if you're like out along a highway where there's high-speed traffic, a 4-foot by 3-foot sign probably isn't going to be very effective because people aren't going to be able to see it. Whereas a smaller sign where there's more of a walking environment downtown is going to work pretty well in that area. One of the things that we always would run into is that people would want multiple signs in front of and on their building. And it's like, well, understand what you want, but also people aren't stupid. Once they see that this is Joe's General Store, they can probably figure out that building right there is Joe's General Store without having to have 4 more signs on the building. But in the way of, and I'll just wrap up with this, in the way of the content neutral and concern about public health is, if with a limitation on the number and the size of signs, basically you advertise your business like you advertise your business. Maple Fields, it's a convenience store, a gas station. The type of products it sells in there. With a limitation on the number of signs that you have, basically you're going to be limited to saying, this is our business and these are the types of things that we do in our business, without having 14 separate signs that all advertise all of the individual things that were in the business. I mean, that might be nice, but eventually that gets to be overload. So so just by limiting the number and the size of signs, you can kind of limit indirectly the content of the signs.
So what's the perspective then from the store owner, Travis? I mean, how does this match up with what you need to do to run a business and promote sales and that sort of thing?
The fact is signs do sell. That is true. But as you mentioned, a convenience store is a convenience store. People know what convenience stores sell.
Right.
You don't need to have a bunch of clutter on the outside of your building to be a higher end quality store. People know, for example, Maplefield sells cigarettes. I don't need a sign outside that say I sell cigarettes. They want them, they know they're there, they're going to come and buy them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the same for beer, milk, wine, any of that stuff.
Right.
Candy, it's all the same. So I agree. You can work successfully within the sign ordinances that are out there in place, quite successfully actually, based on your image and your brand. Once you brand your store, you don't really need a bunch of signs to draw people inside.
So, I mean, is there any data around that, like which says, I mean, for a store that's maybe just trying to get up and running? I mean, Maplefield is an example of a store that's been around a while,
Correct.
Many locations around the state. People over time, if for no other reason, get familiar with what you're carrying and everything. But what about for a startup kind of operation? How would that play? I mean, wouldn't they need to kind of establish?
They would, but I
themselves?
believe in certain towns, such as Manchester, you can apply for different signs for certain periods of time. I mean, you can use those temporary signs to draw your clientele in.
Right.
But it's all based on customer service driven. If you have good customer service and you're consistent, you're going to build a customer base pretty quickly.
Okay.
Retailers are confined by their contracts with
correct.
tobacco companies. So the tobacco companies, it's not the retailers, it's the tobacco companies that are basically dictating how the point of sale looks and is displayed. Knowing that there are 1,000 retailers in the state of Vermont and how frequently youth are exposed to the tobacco advertising that the tobacco companies are mandating, 70% of youth visit those convenience stores at least once a week. And the premise is that the more frequently youth are exposed to the tobacco advertising that the companies are mandating, not Maplefield's is mandating it, or Jill's convenience store or whoever else, the likelihood of the increased use of tobacco products goes up based on the amount of exposure they have to that marketing. It's kind of like marketing 101, right? The more often you see the ad, the more likely you are
To want it.
to want that product and to buy that product.
I remember there's an old rule of thumb that's like 7 impressions before you get to a sale or something.
Right.
Like that.
So
More
okay.
like
So
17, actually.
so then, retail stores are the primary place where tobacco companies are trying to recruit new users, because gone are the days where they can take full-page ads out
With the Marlboro Man.
with the Marlboro Man or other characters, and make that and use that medium, that marketing medium. So they're using the point of sale. So 90% of those new users are youth. So when it comes back to content neutral advertising, that's how sign regulations that towns adopt can affect the youth use rates of tobacco, alcohol, or other substances that might be out there.
And that applies to both the exterior signage
Right,
and
so it
inside
could
the
be
store.
something, I think Travis or Jim mentioned it could be something as simple like adopting a sign regulation that says only 20% of each window can be dedicated to signs. So how that affects maybe tobacco advertising is that if you're also trying to advertise a milk sale, your bread sale, then you've got less space to dedicate to tobacco advertising.
Okay.
I think 20% of a window space is generous. Just because we need to see outside. I mean, it just creates a safer environment if your windows are open when you can see outside.
Right.
It just looks better, gives you a better image all the way around.
And I would say that municipalities and their regulations don't typically regulate placement or anything else having to do with signs inside of stores.
Correct.
At the same time, there's a gray area, because there's always a gray area in these regulations when it comes to window signs, and when is a display a window sign? Because if you display something prominently enough inside the store that's visible through the window, it's pretty much the same thing, without calling it a window
around,
sign.
huh?
If you had a big display in the middle of the floor, 5 feet back from a big window, it's kind of a window sign. And depending on the language and the intent of a particular ordinance, a municipality might try to enforce that and require that display be moved so it doesn't effectively act as an exterior sign.
I was wondering, Jim, do these rules and regulations vary widely around the state? I mean, or are these sort of statewide kind of regulations that we're talking about here? Or is it really up to individual municipalities to make their own decisions about how they want to regulate those sorts of things?
Yeah, I would have to say, I don't have a lot of experience with other municipalities around the state outside of Bennington County, but they vary a lot just in Bennington County. Like I said, and it depends very much on the character of the town and the what the town is trying to accomplish. So some are just very rudimentary 4 lines in a zoning ordinance, in a section of the zoning ordinance that says maybe no internally illuminated signs and no signs over 32 square feet and no more than X number of signs per premise. Whereas other municipalities might have 3 or 4 or 5 pages of sign regulations that deal with get really into kind of some of the design stuff on signs and specify it by district. Like in Bennington, they're if you've been down Northside Drive, you kind of see a transformation from their big high overhead standalone signs to the lower pedestal mounted signs. So they've gotten kind of to that level of detail to say not only are they limited in number and size, but also kind of the design and the height and all the rest of it. So it's like I said, it varies an awful lot from town to town.
And to use an example, I think we can all, if we think hard enough or we're going to other communities, using a convenience store as an example, you might pull up to a gas station convenience store, and on the side of the building you might see an advertisement for a milk special, and then right next to that ad will be an ad perhaps for something like a little cigar, or more commonly known as cigarillos, which are the flavored, shorter, smaller cigars that tobacco companies contract with our retailers to sell. 72% of Vermont tobacco stores sell these flavored cigarillos, and nearly 2/3 of them sell the single cigarillos, and it's a price point for youth. They're cheap, they're flavored with usually a candy or sweet flavoring, and they're a great product for tobacco companies to market to youth. So you've got the cigarillo next to the healthy milk. And again, that's usually on the side of a convenience store, extra advertising, and it's to the youth again.
I've often wondered, Travis, how do stores such as yours sort of screen when there's someone who's attempting to buy a pack of cigarettes or six-pack of beer or something like that when you think, I wonder if this person's legal?
The state has very strict guidelines on carding, 40 or under for alcohol and 30 or under for tobacco. At Maple Fields, I know everybody that does not look 40, period, gets carded. Built into our POS system now, we actually can scan a license any state.
Wow.
Scan the barcode on the back and it gives their date of birth and tells you immediately whether they're authorized or not for what they're buying
Okay.
based on the state standards.
Of course, now some of us are at the point where getting carded is kind of a cool thing. But
Some of us, I absolutely agree.
it used to be that way, but
There's sometimes, we have regular customers, and on a convenience store side, if I have a new cashier, the rule I have is if the cashier says no, the answer is no. I don't care if they're my brother and they're 45.
right,
If the cashier says no, that's a no sale.
right.
Just to empower that cashier to know they have that decision.
Better safe than sorry.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The other thing I was wondering about, how do I don't know much about this, but these vaporized cigarettes, how does this play into that? I mean, that's
That's a
kind of a new
great-
thing that's
Sure.
sort of,
That's a great question.
seemingly has emerged recently.
Just this morning, I had a conversation with someone about electronic vaping and how that is a product that is being marketed to youth. And one of the reasons why tobacco companies are focusing so much on youth is, unfortunately, using an expression that these tobacco companies use, is that they need replacement smokers. And where else better to get replacement smokers but from that youth population? So so there are multiple products out there that are very specifically marketed to youth by tobacco companies, and electronic cigarettes and vape products is very much one of those products. And they do that with the candy sweet flavorings that are found in some of those liquids, whether or not they contain nicotine or not. And they also do that by sort of the outside design or colors of that electronic vape product. Travis and I have had lots of conversations about those products. I've tried to learn where the retailers or how those products play into the contracts that the retailers have with tobacco companies. In the North Shire, the high school youth use rate of electronic vape products is about 43% have ever used one of those products. The state percentage is about 30%. So in the North Shire, we're statistically higher
That's interesting.
than the state. And I believe we're around, I'd have to check my numbers, but I think we're around 19% are, yes, so the percent of students who have used an electronic vapor product in the past 30 days for the North Shire is 19%, as opposed to the state average, which is 15%. And those numbers are coming from the 2015 Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And again, that 30-day use is also statistically higher than the state. So electronic cigarettes and the marketing that the tobacco companies contracts with the retailers is a concern and very much does play into the content neutral advertising, because that's another ad or marketing message that retailers could put up within the confines of a town's sign regulations.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's interesting. It presents a challenge in a way for business when they start a new product line. As Travis said, you come to be, know that a certain business or a certain type of business sells a certain product. When a new product like these vape things come out, somehow you want to get that message out there that those are available in the store. And I've seen some businesses because you're limited, you can't just throw up a new sign that says, now we have this, you're limited. They're saying, like, change the name of the business to include, Joe's store and vape shop, so that people, so that people know it's there. It's, it's one of the things that's, it really is the sign restrictions kind of drive and limit how people can advertise new product lines too.
That being said, getting back to the contracts, we are contracted by the tobacco companies, and they actually pay for placement of the products, especially the vape products. However, they buy a certain amount of space on your front counter. It doesn't mean it needs to be at eye level in front of the youth. It has to be on the front counter. I get it, but it doesn't have to be the main display on the front counter. It can be around the corner next to the Megabucks machine. And
Travis and I have had multiple conversations about this, and I've thanked Travis for his interpretation of and meeting the meeting the expectations of those contracts is very important.
Exactly.
And we're not here to say, violate your contract, but there are ways to look at that contract, and Travis has done an excellent job, because that is a key component. That point of sale is very, very valuable retail space.
Sure. Yeah.
Very valuable.
Exactly.
And yes, content neutral advertising, I think people think of it as primarily being your outside advertising, but towns can choose, if they want to, adopt sort of a point of sale regulation if they wanted to. That can be adopted. I have not heard of a town in Manchester or not in Vermont taking that on or wanting to address regulations around the point of sale, but I do know that we have what we call healthy retailers in the area that choose specifically, even though they are tobacco retailers, to not display the tobacco products within vision or sight of customers. So they're still meeting the expectations of selling tobacco products. They're just not, the products themselves aren't visible.
And I think that's an important point to make, is that, we're talking about regulation today, and lest everybody think that all we do is advocate for regulation. Very often the best way to deal with these issues isn't regulation, it's working with people. It's working with the business owners. It's getting people together in a forum, talking about shared goals and objectives, and strategizing how things can be done. And you generally find that people are by and large pretty cooperative and want to work together. So yeah, so sign ordinances and bylaws are good. They serve a useful purpose, I think, for everybody, but it's not the only way you implement your municipal plan objectives.
Right.
That is an excellent point.
Well, much more I'm sure we could talk about this subject, but we're just about out of time here. But I wanted to thank Travis Wood, the store manager of the Manchester Maple Fields, Jim Sullivan, the executive director of the Bennington County Regional Commission, and Victoria Silsby of the Collaborative Tobacco Prevention Coordinator. And thank you for watching as well. This has been Prevention Works by the Collaborative. Hope you've enjoyed the show, and we'll see you the next time.